Welcome to the Gavel. I'm Linda Kibi. In October this year, Nigeria experienced the worst floods in a decade. Several parts of the country were affected, with more than 600 people killed, 1.4 million people displaced, and properties destroyed. Now, as those affected count their losses, and as government and private individuals provide relief materials, the National Assembly is meeting with heads of humanitarian and relief agencies to discuss their 2023 budget proposals, with emphasis on empowering them to better manage disasters. The waters are drying up in some communities badly affected by floods, but residents are still slowly picking up the pieces of their lives and counting their losses. The federal government, through its humanitarian agencies, as well as state governments and politicians, have been sending relief materials to the affected communities. However, the Director General of the National Emergency Management Agency, NEMA, Mr. Mustafa Ahmed, has faulted the response of some state governments to the flood warnings earlier given by NEMA. Speaking during his defense of the agency's 2023 budget before the Senate Committee on Special Duties, Mr. Ahmed says prior to the 2022 flood disaster, NEMA wrote to all states of the Federation on the need to set up local emergency committees to mitigate the impact of floods.
We give them warning in time, but they have to also act early. It's not that all the states are aware that this thing is going to hit. And we have also sent them with risk mapping, but what action was taken. I have written to all the 36 state governors, and I have copies to show you 4 times. When NIMET released seasonal climate prediction and NISA released their flood outlook, we warned them in time. After we organized stakeholders meeting to analyze those reports and identify vulnerable areas with risk mapping, and sent it out to all the state governors early.
Committee members are also dissatisfied with the sum of 774 million naira earmarked for capital votes on NEMA in the 2023 budget, just as the Director General of the agency is seeking more funds.
We have tripartite management of disaster in Nigeria. We have local government management agency, we have a state management agency, emergency management agency. We have NEMA, but it's like everything comes to NEMA in Nigeria. The local government is not functioning. The state government is not functioning. It's only National Emergency Management Agency. And I don't think you people will have the capacity, the manpower, the resources, and the logistics you need to tackle this. So what is your agency doing to ensure that the local government emergency management agency comes on board and the state government emergency management agency comes on board? Where little thing will happen in a community, they will leave local government, they will leave state government, they will rush to NEMA. What is actually going on? So where is the advocacy campaign? Where is the awareness, for citizens also to know their rights? Then I'm also very much aware that NIMET came up with warnings to citizens about the impending danger associated with the flooding. But majority of Nigerians did not hear that. And I feel that it's also part of NEMA to create such awareness so Nigerians will understand the danger inherent in flooding or during the rainy season.
Mr. Chairman, it's sad to note that only 4 states have local emergency management committee. Only 4 states. Some states, as we speak, same as don't exist. They don't have state emergency management agency. How do we manage disaster from bottom up when you don't have, some states don't even have SEMA?
Another lawmaker, Senator Francis Fadaunsi, is advocating that NEMA should be moved away from the Ministry of Humanitarian Affairs and Disaster Management and placed directly under the presidency.
This NEMA should not be under any ministry. It should be directly under the presidency. But it's an emergency situation. Go and see NEMA all over the world. I don't think your capital can go far because we keep on blaming you. These ecological funds are collected by individuals, backed by the same state. And they are the same state now calling on the same federal government to come to their aid from the same source. automatically maybe the National Assembly must have to look for something to do in form of legislation to bring you directly under the presidency. Because this is an emergency situation that you can spend any amount from our budget.
Meanwhile, members of the House of Representatives from the Niger Delta area are calling for the resignation of the Minister of Humanitarian Affairs, Disaster Management and Social Development, Mrs. Sadiya Farouk. The call follows the address by the Minister of Humanitarian Affairs on the 3rd of November 2022, where she said Bayelsa State was not amongst the top 10 most affected states by the flood disaster currently ravaging some states in the country.
We, the Niger Delta members of the House of Representatives, strongly and unequivocally condemn in strong terms the statement credited to the Honorable Minister as insensitive, unpatriotic, and unnationalistic. While we are not denying the fact that other states in the Federation are also affected, the comparison and figures given by the Honorable Minister shows a glaring attempt to downplay the harsh reality on the ground.
The lawmaker says if she fails to resign, President Buhari should relieve her of her appointment immediately. But the presidency has described as inappropriate in this climate the calls from some quarters for the resignation of the Minister of Humanitarian Affairs, Disaster Management and Social Development. Reacting via a statement signed by the Senior Special Assistant on Media and Publicity, Mr. Garba Shehu, the presidency described the scenes of flooding from Bayelsa State as deeply saddening, just as it commiserated with victims of and those affected by floods. The House of Representatives organized a legislative summit on transparency and accountability in the oil and gas sector. The summit had in attendance legislators from the two chambers of the National Assembly, as well as heads of anti-corruption agencies, to discuss ways of ensuring transparency in the country's petroleum sector.
The law has led to the unbundling of the petroleum industry through the Petroleum Industry Act. However, despite the new law, which is expected to guide the operations of Nigeria's petroleum sector to ensure profitability and increased revenue, issues of transparency and accountability must be taken seriously to meet these objectives. It is for this reason that the House of Representatives Committee on Anti-Corruption is organizing this summit to create a platform to harp on the need for transparency and accountability in the oil and gas sector. This point is further buttressed by the chairman of the committee in his opening remarks.
In line with the pledge of the 9th House of Representatives to be at the forefront of promoting accountability and transparency in our national life, the House Committee considered it necessary and very crucial to organize this summit with a view to creating a platform where we can stress, discuss, and outline the importance of this new legislation and in particular, the need for accountability and transparency such that Nigerians will not only understand what the new legislation has brought to bear on the operation of the NNPC, but that we will appreciate what the new role is.
The importance of the summit for the next steps towards better governance in the petroleum sector is further emphasized by the invited guests, including the anti-graft agencies.
Corruption and mismanagement continue to deprive Nigerians of economic opportunities, but the oil and gas sector, at the same time, is key to Nigeria's sustainable development. If managed and allocated properly, the revenues can be invested into industrialization and value chains, education and health, and thus improve access of all Nigerians to basic public goods and services, bringing this beautiful nation to the heights it should be at. This is why transparency and accountability in the oil and gas sector should be a main focus in the 2023 elections. Just too much depends on it. And looking around and seeing not only the efforts being done to hold this summit, but also the invitation being honored by so many legislators, as well as stakeholders from the relevant MDAs of the sector, today's summit should serve as an important next step towards targeted anti-corruption policies and their implementation, and towards better governance of the sector.
Transparency supports accountability and reduces inefficiencies. It also enhances relationship among stakeholders as it boosts trust among the society, government, and companies, thereby reducing misperceptions and reducing local tensions. It is therefore important for the government to ensure that instituted measures aimed at enhancing transparency in the oil sector include full disclosure of NNPC joint venture arrangements and establish clear institutional responsibilities for revenue assessment, collection, and reporting.
Now, many of the clauses and agreements that facilitate illicit financial flows and that steal money away from the very stare of legislators and executive and minister and civil society are hidden in agreements that are innocuously normal, and they are ordinary, and they appear to be consistent with business practice, but they are actually not. These agreements were in the past consciously negotiated by government and NNPC line officers. The fact that NNPC has changed from NNPC to NNPC Limited does not mean the brains of those who used to negotiate the agreements have changed. And unless they acquire new skills and understanding, they will remain victims of the anomalies within the sector, and within 1 to 2 years, Nigeria will suddenly realize that the very high expectation from returns in this sector have not been met.
The Chief Executive Officer of NNPC Limited had so much to say on oil theft.
Today, when PMS comes into this country, we transfer to the marketers at 113 naira, is that right, CFO? 113 naira for us to realize 165 at the pump. So you must sell to them at 113 naira to be able to deliver at 165 at the pump. This is the reality. So that means whatever is the cost, anything after that value is subsidy. So somebody has to pay for it. And just imagine, and this is very easy, you all have phones. Just Google and see the current market value of petroleum. It's there. Everybody has a phone here. Look at the Platts quotation for PMS. You will see that there is no way today that you can land a liter of fuel, PMS, to the pumps, even at the 419 or 445 naira exchange rate at less than 400 naira to the liter. So it's not possible. So every difference between 113 and that value is subsidy. That means in some instances, you may be subsidizing up to 290 to a liter. And with this regime, it is impossible for you to avoid all the wrong things that are happening. Round tripping, cross-border smuggling, document forgery. Anywhere you have arbitrage, and you'll agree with me, anywhere you have arbitrage, you will have these issues. And as long as arbitrage is there, you will continue to have these challenges. So you cannot hold NNPC accountable for it. Because it's a value chain that involves everything and everybody. And the only way you can resolve this, yes, of course, price it at market. But we also understand that you cannot price it at market today because of the obvious socioeconomic impact of the pricing of PMS. We understand this very perfectly. And every country is doing something about it. I know some of you may be aware that some countries, even in Europe, are today afraid of what will happen in December because of high energy costs. This is reality. Some developed countries have actually taken out taxes on PMS, on petroleum, so that they can bring down the cost. It's just another word for subsidy. No matter how they call it, it is subsidy. Introducing subsidy in different. So countries are doing something to bring down the cost of energy. This is our choice, and of course, in today's reality, this is really what we are dealing with. And therefore, delivery of value to the Federation account, and by law also today, the NNPC Limited will no longer be required to go to FAC. And the reason is very simple. It is expected to pay taxes and pay royalties and pay dividends.
Welcome back to the Gavel. It was a busy week in the National Assembly as various standing committees in the Senate and House of Representatives received heads of government ministries, departments and agencies who came to defend their 2023 budget proposals. Heads of government ministries, departments and agencies continued their sojourn to the National Assembly to defend their 2023 budget proposals. The Minister of Aviation, Senator Hadi Sirika, was before the Senate Committee on Aviation to discuss his 2023 budget proposal. During the meeting, he assures federal legislators that the federal government is working to ensure that the trapped funds of Emirates Airlines are paid as quickly as possible. Emirates Airlines suspended flight operations in and out of Nigeria over its inability to repatriate $85 million from the country. The aviation minister, however, notes that while the federal government is working on addressing the problem, Emirates Airlines must exercise restraint and treat Nigeria as a sovereign and valuable market.
When we came in 2016, we found out that about $460 million was blocked in Nigeria. And at that time, we were under recession. But because we are up to our own commitments, Mr. President directed and approved, and the monies were found and given to them, all of it, in 3 tranches. And the mechanism was asked to be put in place in such a way that the monies would not be trapped. Then we went through another cycle of recession, plus COVID, plus dwindling revenue, and so on. And the foreign exchange became extremely very scarce, not only for airline operations, but for other operations. And so we pleaded with all the airlines around the world that they should see the situation that Nigeria is in and to give us time to be able to repay this money like we did. We have demonstrated that we honor our obligations, and we did it in the past. So this one took time, and most airlines and most countries, almost all countries except UAE, have understood the situation in Nigeria and are hoping that the monies are going to be found. As the CBN governor said, will be paid before the end of the year, almost all of it, but that they should exercise restraint and treat Nigeria for the value that it has.
The federal government has disclosed that over 12,000 inmates have been released from various correctional centers across the country within the last 6 years, in line with the policy of prison decongestion. The Attorney General of the Federation and Minister of Justice, Mr. Abubakar Malami, stated this to members of the Senate Committee on Judiciary while defending the ministry's 2023 budget. Mr. Malami says the federal government was able to decongest the over-congested prisons across the country through policy actions, aside the administration of Criminal Justice Act, meant for expeditious dispensation of justice.
It was common knowledge that as of 2015, when we came on board as a government, the decongestion of prison was indeed a front burner issue. And you will agree collectively with me that it is no longer an issue out there in the policy as being an issue of advocacy or agitation, simply because it is being very well addressed. Mr. President, personally and indeed encouraged the state governors across the nation to consider prison visit in the exercise of the powers vested in them. In writing, Mr. President extended further requests to the judiciary and urged the CJs across the nation to consider prison visits in writing. At one single prison visit in Kano State, the governor of Kano State succeeded in releasing over 500 people at a time, prisoners, inmates at a time. And then Mr. President took further steps to put in place a committee, decongestion of prison committee, that went around all over the Federation, and indeed those that are found befitting for consideration were indeed granted certain respite arising therefrom. And that is not only what was done by the President, but indeed in the exercise of his constitutional powers, Mr. President had equally extended some compassion arising from the prerogative of mercy arrangement to over 200 people, among others.
The National Population Commission, NPC, will require 532.7 billion naira to conduct a national census in April 2023. The chairman of the commission, Mr. Nasir Kwara, is making the disclosure to members of a Senate Committee on National Population and Identity Management when he appeared before the committee to defend its 2023 budget.
At the time we go to the field, administering the questionnaire that is already in the PDA, and answers to questions that we ask are fed into it and uploaded to our database in headquarters, we can do the analysis and provide Nigerians digital data that, by the grace of God, will not be as contentious as we had in the past censuses that have been conducted. Technology of today has enabled us to be able to do this. And it is going to be verifiable. You can see the chairman made mention of the locality listing that we have done, and we're discussing with chairmen of local government officials and state government officials. We have presented the locality list that we have been able to generate during the enumeration area demarcation for Nigerians to verify if there are exclusion or double inclusion or spelling mistakes. All this will be corrected and then brought back to us, and that will be the foundation upon which we now assign people to go and do the enumeration by the grace of God in April 2023.
The House of Representatives Committee on Foreign Affairs has finally considered and adopted the 2023 budget of the Federal Ministry of Foreign Affairs. This was after the committee had refused to consider the ministry's budget the previous week for failing to implement Sections 10 and 7 of the 2022 Appropriation Act, among others. Meanwhile, the chairman of the Economic and Financial Crimes Commission was before the House Committee on Financial Crimes to defend his agency's budget. Before the meeting went into a closed-door session, the EFCC chairman gave an overview of the agency's performance. After the meeting, the EFCC chairman spoke to journalists on recoveries made so far and confiscated properties, as well as a court judgment which had committed him to prison for failing to obey an initial court ruling.
We have gotten quite a lot, and we have, of course, the provisions of POCA, provided that each relevant agency should open confiscated and forfeited properties account. We have opened that, and of course we are remitting all that belongs to the federal government into that account. Of course, other victims of crime are also being paid, based on the recoveries that are made on their behalf.
Chairman, sir, that was a question of court against EFCC today. So what's your reaction to this?
Well, we have appealed against it already, so we will allow the natural course of the law to take its effect.
The House of Representatives Committee on Diaspora Affairs says diaspora voting must be considered, as that is the direction the world is going, and Nigeria must not be left behind. The chairman of the committee stated this after the budget defense session of Nigerians in Diaspora Commission. Meanwhile, the chairman of the Nigerians in Diaspora Commission is advising Nigerians who do not have jobs waiting for them outside the country to ensure that it is sorted before they leave Nigeria.
NIDCOM is working actively with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, with NAPTIP, with immigration to try and stop illegal migration. On the issue of Nigerians in diaspora, they are actively collaborating with Nigerians in diaspora to ensure that Nigeria has a better relationship going forward. Unfortunately, diaspora voting bill, we worked on it. It didn't pass now. Whether we like it or not, eventually it is going to pass, because that is the direction the world is going.
Now, this is where we call it a day on this week's edition of the Gavel. If you have any views on any of the issues discussed, please email us on thegavel@channelstv.com. Thank you for staying with us, and see you again next week.